The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Nellis Air Force Base as Captain Sarah Phoenix Mitchell completed her pre-flight inspection of the F-22 Raptor. The sleek angular aircraft gleamed in the Nevada desert light, its stealth coating absorbing the early rays like a predator preparing for the hunt. Sarah had earned her call sign 3 years earlier, during a training exercise when she had literally risen from the ashes of a simulated defeat to turn the tables on her opponents in spectacular fashion. At 28, Sarah was one of the youngest pilots ever to qualify for the F-22 program, but her skills in the cockpit were already legendary among her peers. She had logged over 2,000 flight hours across multiple aircraft types, including combat missions over hostile territory that she couldn't discuss even with her closest friends. Her reputation preceded her wherever she went in military aviation circles, and today's mission would add another chapter to that growing legend. The briefing that morning had been unusually tense. Intelligence reports indicated that an unidentified aircraft had been detected approaching restricted airspace near a highly classified military installation. The target appeared to be flying erratically, refusing to respond to radio communications and showing characteristics that didn't match any known civilian or military aircraft in the region. Command had authorized an intercept mission with rules of engagement that made Sarah's pulse quicken. As she climbed into the cockpit, Sarah's mind was already shifting into combat mode. The F-22's advanced systems came alive around her with a symphony of electronic tones and display lights. She ran through her checklist with mechanical precision, each switch and button responding to her touch like extensions of her own body. The Raptor was more than just a machine to her. It was a partnership forged through countless hours of training and real-world experience. The tower cleared her for takeoff, and Sarah felt the familiar rush as the F-22's twin engines spooled up to full power. The acceleration pressed her back into her seat as the aircraft lifted off the runway and climbed rapidly into the clear desert sky. Within minutes, she was supersonic and heading toward the intercept coordinates, her radar painting a picture of the airspace ahead. What Sarah didn't know was that this routine intercept mission was about to become one of the most critical moments of her career, testing not just her flying skills but her judgment under pressure in ways she had never imagined. 20 miles from the intercept coordinates, Sarah's radar operator back at base control began feeding her updated information about the target. The unidentified aircraft was maintaining an altitude of 15,000 feet and appeared to be following a direct course toward the restricted zone. More concerning was the complete radio silence from the aircraft despite repeated attempts at communication on both civilian and military frequencies. Sarah adjusted her approach vector, using the F-22's stealth capabilities to close the distance without being detected. The Raptor's advanced radar systems were already painting a detailed picture of the target, but something about the aircraft's profile on her screen seemed unusual. It appeared to be smaller than a typical commercial aircraft, but larger than most private planes, with a flight pattern that suggested either mechanical problems or inexperienced piloting. As she closed to within 10 miles, Sarah attempted her own radio contact with the unknown aircraft. Her voice was calm and professional as she transmitted on the emergency frequency, identifying herself as a military interceptor and requesting immediate response. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the steady hum of her aircraft systems and the occasional crackle of static from the radio. Ground control was becoming increasingly agitated with each passing minute. The unknown aircraft was now less than 5 minutes from entering the most sensitive airspace in the continental United States, home to experimental aircraft and classified weapons systems that could not be compromised under any circumstances. The standing orders were clear. Any aircraft that penetrated that airspace without authorization was to be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. Sarah's flight computer chimed softly, indicating that her weapons systems were fully operational and ready for engagement. The AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles mounted in her internal weapons bay were among the most sophisticated air-to-air weapons in the world, capable of destroying any aircraft within a 50-mile radius with devastating precision. Her training had prepared her for this moment countless times, but the reality of potentially taking a life weighed heavily on her mind. The target aircraft was now visible through her canopy as a small speck against the blue sky. Sarah maneuvered the F-22 into an optimal firing position, her finger hovering over the weapons release button as she waited for the final authorization from command. The next few minutes would determine whether this unknown pilot would live or die, and the responsibility for that decision was rapidly shifting to Sarah's shoulders. Ground control's voice crackled through Sarah's headset with an urgency she had rarely heard before. The unknown aircraft had just crossed the outer perimeter of the restricted zone, and all attempts at communication had failed. Intelligence analysts were reporting that the aircraft's flight characteristics matched those of a potential kamikaze attack, given its unwavering course toward the most sensitive facilities on the base. Sarah could now clearly see the target aircraft through her heads-up display. It appeared to be a twin-engine civilian aircraft, possibly a small business jet, flying straight and level with no deviation from its dangerous course. The pilot inside that cockpit was either completely unaware of the restricted airspace they were violating or deliberately ignoring all warnings and proceeding with hostile intent. The weapons authorization came through with stark clarity. "Phoenix, you are cleared hot. Repeat, you are cleared to engage the target." Sarah's training took over as she armed her missiles and established a firing solution. The F-22's targeting computer had locked onto the civilian aircraft with deadly precision, calculating wind speed, altitude, and intercept angles with the cold efficiency of advanced technology. But something made Sarah hesitate. Despite all the protocols and the clear threat to national security, her instincts as a pilot were telling her that something wasn't right about this situation. The aircraft's flight pattern was too steady, too controlled for a pilot with hostile intentions. Someone planning an attack would likely be flying more erratically, taking evasive action, or showing some sign of awareness about the military response closing in on them. Sarah made a split-second decision that would either save lives or potentially compromise national security. Instead of firing immediately, she maneuvered the F-22 alongside the civilian aircraft, positioning herself where the pilot couldn't help but see her. The sight of a fully armed fighter jet appearing suddenly outside their window would be enough to get any pilot's attention, regardless of their intentions. As Sarah pulled her aircraft into formation alongside the target, she could see into the cockpit of the smaller plane. What she saw there made her blood run cold and confirmed that her instincts had been right all along. This wasn't a terrorist attack or a hostile intrusion. This was something far more tragic and far more complicated than anyone had realized. Through the cockpit window of the civilian aircraft, Sarah could see an elderly man slumped over the controls, clearly unconscious or worse. The plane was flying on autopilot, which explained the steady, unwavering course that had triggered the security alert. This wasn't a terrorist attack or a deliberate violation of restricted airspace. This was a medical emergency at 15,000 feet, and an innocent man's life hung in the balance. Sarah immediately radioed ground control with her observations, her voice cutting through the tension that had been building over the past 20 minutes. "Control, this is Phoenix. I have visual on the pilot. He appears to be unconscious. The aircraft is flying on autopilot. This is not a hostile situation. Repeat, this is not a hostile situation." The response from ground control was swift but conflicted. While Sarah's report changed the nature of the threat, the aircraft was still penetrating deeper into restricted airspace with each passing second. The facilities below contained some of the most classified military technology in existence, and allowing any unauthorized aircraft to fly over them, regardless of the circumstances, violated every security protocol in the book. Sarah could hear the heated discussion taking place between various command authorities over the radio. Some voices argued for maintaining the hostile engagement, pointing out that the unconscious pilot story could be an elaborate deception. Others urged caution, noting that shooting down a civilian aircraft with an incapacitated pilot would create an international incident and a public relations nightmare for the military. While the debate raged on the ground, Sarah made another critical decision. She knew that the civilian aircraft's autopilot system would eventually run out of fuel, and when it did, the plane would crash, potentially into populated areas beyond the restricted zone. Even if they didn't shoot it down, lives were still at risk if they didn't take action soon. Using her F-22's advanced flight control systems, Sarah began attempting to make contact with the civilian aircraft's autopilot system through electronic signals. Modern aircraft were equipped with emergency override systems that could be activated by military controllers in extreme situations, but the process was complex and had never been attempted under these circumstances. Sarah was essentially trying to remotely pilot an aircraft she had never flown while maintaining formation at high speed in restricted airspace. The breakthrough came when Sarah's electronic warfare officer back at base managed to establish a data link with the civilian aircraft's flight management system. The unconscious pilot had apparently been flying from Denver to Las Vegas when he suffered what appeared to be a heart attack or stroke. The aircraft's autopilot had maintained his last programmed heading, which unfortunately took him directly through some of the most sensitive military airspace in the country. Ground control was still divided on how to proceed. The aircraft was now flying directly over facilities that didn't officially exist, and satellite imagery would later show that foreign intelligence services were undoubtedly tracking every moment of this incident. The pressure to shoot down the aircraft was mounting from higher levels of command, despite Sarah's confirmation that the pilot was clearly incapacitated. That's when Sarah's call sign became the most important factor in the entire situation. 3 years earlier, during the training exercise that had earned her the Phoenix designation, Sarah had demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to resurrect hopeless situations and turn them into victories. Her commanding officers remembered that incident, and more importantly, they trusted her judgment under pressure. "Phoenix, this is General Morrison." The voice of the base commander cut through all the other radio chatter with unmistakable authority. "I'm giving you tactical command of this situation. You have 5 minutes to resolve this before I'm forced to authorize lethal action. Do whatever you think is right." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. The life of the unconscious pilot, the security of classified military installations, and potentially her own career all hung in the balance of the next few minutes. But this was exactly the kind of situation that had earned her the Phoenix call sign, and she had never failed to rise to the occasion when lives were on the line. Working with her ground support team, Sarah began executing a plan that had never been attempted before in military aviation. Using the data link with the civilian aircraft, she was going to try to reprogram its autopilot to divert it away from the restricted zone and toward the nearest airport capable of handling an emergency landing. The process required split-second timing and precision flying that pushed both aircraft to their operational limits. The next 3 minutes were the longest of Sarah's career as she worked to upload new navigation commands to the civilian aircraft's flight computer. The process required her to maintain precise formation with the target, while her ground team transmitted complex data through the F-22s' advanced communication systems. One wrong move or miscalculation could result in a mid-air collision that would kill everyone involved. Sarah could see the unconscious pilot stirring slightly in his seat, which gave her hope that he might regain consciousness before landing. However, she couldn't count on that possibility, and the aircraft would need to be capable of landing itself if necessary. Modern civilian aircraft had auto-land capabilities, but activating them remotely while the plane was in flight had never been attempted under these circumstances. The breakthrough came when the civilian aircraft's autopilot finally accepted the new navigation commands. Sarah watched with relief as the plane began a gradual turn away from the most sensitive areas of the restricted zone. The immediate security threat was neutralized, but the emergency was far from over. The aircraft still needed to be guided to a safe landing with an unconscious pilot at the controls. Sarah coordinated with air traffic control at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas to clear a runway for an emergency landing. The airport's crash and rescue teams were already mobilizing, along with medical personnel who would be standing by to treat the stricken pilot. Every second counted, as the man's medical condition appeared to be deteriorating based on what Sarah could observe from her position alongside his aircraft. As they approached Las Vegas airspace, Sarah faced her final challenge of the mission. The civilian aircraft's autoland system required specific radio beacon signals to guide it to the runway, but the unconscious pilot couldn't manually tune his radios to the correct frequencies. Sarah would have to use her F-22's electronic warfare capabilities to effectively become the aircraft's radio operator, a procedure that had never been tested in real-world conditions. The pressure was immense as Sarah began the delicate process of remotely configuring the civilian aircraft's navigation and communication systems for an automated landing. She knew that millions of people would eventually learn about this incident, and her actions in the next few minutes would either be remembered as a heroic rescue or a tragic failure that cost an innocent man his life. The final approach to McCarran International Airport was a masterpiece of precision flying and electronic wizardry. Sarah maintained formation with the civilian aircraft as it descended through the Nevada sky, her F-22 systems continuously monitoring and adjusting the smaller plane's flight path. The unconscious pilot remained slumped over his controls, completely unaware that his life was being saved by a fighter pilot he would never meet. As the civilian aircraft touched down on runway 25L, Sarah felt a surge of relief that threatened to overwhelm her professional composure. The landing was textbook perfect, with the aircraft's auto-brake system bringing it to a safe stop in the center of the runway. Emergency vehicles immediately surrounded the plane, and within minutes, paramedics were extracting the unconscious pilot and rushing him to a waiting ambulance. Sarah's F-22 screamed overhead in a victory roll that wasn't officially authorized but was ignored by everyone who witnessed it. She had successfully prevented what could have been a national security disaster, while simultaneously saving the life of an innocent civilian. The Phoenix call sign had once again proven its worth, and Sarah had added another incredible chapter to her growing legend. The investigation that followed revealed that the pilot, a 67-year-old retired engineer named Robert Chen, had suffered a massive stroke while flying to Las Vegas to visit his grandchildren. The aircraft's autopilot had maintained his last heading, which by pure coincidence took him directly through restricted military airspace. Without Sarah's intervention, the outcome would have been tragic on multiple levels. Robert Chen spent 3 weeks in intensive care, but eventually made a full recovery. He never learned the identity of the fighter pilot who had saved his life, as the details of the incident were classified for national security reasons. However, he often spoke about the mysterious F-22 that had appeared outside his cockpit window, in what he remembered as a brief moment of consciousness during his medical emergency. For Sarah, the incident became a defining moment in her career, though she was forbidden from discussing it publicly. Her superiors recognized her exceptional judgment under pressure, with a classified commendation that would never appear in any public record. The Phoenix call sign had evolved from a symbol of her ability to overcome defeat to a representation of her power to bring hope and salvation to impossible situations. Years later, when Sarah was promoted to colonel and given command of her own fighter squadron, the story of the civilian aircraft intercept was still whispered about in military aviation circles. It had become a legend that inspired young pilots to trust their instincts and remember that sometimes the greatest victories come not from pulling the trigger, but from having the wisdom and courage to hold fire when everyone else is ready to shoot.